Studies in Saiva Siddhanta by J.M. Nallaswami Pillai, 1911, Madras. Introduction. The assemblage of papers that make up the present volume records the harvest of 20 years' ceaseless research in a field of philosophy and mysticism by one who is acknowledged on all hands to be one of the most well-informed interpreters of the Tamil developments of the great Agamic school of thought. His translations into English of the Tamil redactions of the Shivajnana Bodham and the Shivajnana Siddhyar and of Tiruvarutpayan bring together a mass of explanatory and illustrative material that imparts a freshness and a purity to his performance, elements that we either totally miss or descry with but exceeding dimness in the parallel undertakings of the Reverend H.R. Hoisington and the Reverend Dr. G.U. Pope, and more recently of the Reverend H.A. Popley. The claims of Mr. J.M. Nallaswami Pillai are thus well established as an excellent student of Tamil letters and a thoroughly reliable interpreter of the phase of the Agamata that is developed and perfected in the magnificent writings of the Tamil medieval scholastics, divines, and saints, among whom Mikandar was perhaps the foremost in point of learning, spirituality, and power of persuasion. Those medieval schoolmen were preceded by the earlier teachers of eminence like Vagisha, Sundara, Shambanda, and Manavachaka, men who taught by example rather than by pounding precepts and arid logomachy, as they took their stand on an actual knowledge of the mysteries of the spirit, and never on bare mental brilliance, while mighty spirits like Mullah combined in them the traits of exemplary ethical observance and compelling spiritual inculcation, which hardly left the ripe soul without the pabulum that was imperative for its upward growth or unfoldment and eventual spiritual freedom. The object of the present volume is to open up some of these veins of the purest agamic gold in a style of genial didactics and multicolored presentation, veins which, although referred by our author for the most part to the Tamil minds of Saiva literature, would, on further following up, yet prove to belong to a system of strata more ancient in point of time, more remote in point of place, and more precious in point of composition and structure. The gold that is dug out of the veins is of remarkable quality, be it in the shape of ores, nuggets, or ingots, and the reader will be richly repaid for diving into the book, since each paper therein is devoted to a central idea, which is consistently worked out and explained with ample grace and ease of diction, and he may consequently be sure to emerge from its perusal palpably edified on many of the moot points of the Hindu philosophy, as conned with the aid of the searchlight of the agamic dogmatics that is preserved for us in ancient and medieval Tamil. It is by no means easy to enter into the genius of the Agamanta if one is not conversant with its right traditions, which, by the very manner of their preservation and communication in India, are not of easy access to European scholars. A remarkable instance of failure to enter into the spirit of the agamic teaching on account of this disability is seen in the faulty interpretation put by the Reverend Dr. G.U. Pope on the cardinal doctrine of agamic mysticism, Shaktinipata. The late Oxford professor of Tamil, clever as he was as a skilled translator of the Kural and Naladiyar and the Tiruvakachagam, is quite wide off the mark when he explains Shakti Nipata as cessation of energy in the introductory essay prefixed to his edition of the Tiruvachakam. The explanation calls to mind an analogous instance in which a European Sanskritist, unaware perhaps of the bearings of the expression, rendered the collocation Paramahamsa into Great Goose. The strictly pedagogic purist may endeavor to justify such puerile versions on etymological grounds, but they stand self-condemned as malinterpretations reflecting anything but the sense and soul of the original. Such lapses into unwitting ignorance need never be expected in any of the essays contained in the present collection, as our author is not only a sturdy and indefatigable researcher in Tamil philosophic literature, illuminative of the agamic religion, but has also, in his quest after truth, freely utilized the services of those indigenous savants who represent the highest watermark of Hindu traditional learning and spiritual associations at the present day. It is a remarkable irony of circumstance that beyond sporadic attempts of uncertain value, no serious endeavor has as yet been made to give to the educated public a connected conspectus of the length and breadth of the teachings contained in the Shaivagamas. The Reverend Dr. G. U. Pope, the Reverend H. R. Hoisington, the Reverend T. Folks, and Dr. Carl Grahl of an earlier generation, and some English clerics of a more recent date, such as the Reverend H. A. Popley, the Reverend G. E. Phillips, the Reverend W. Gowdy, the Reverend A. C. Clayton, and a few others, have now and again tried to expound the Tamil phase of the philosophy to the best of their lights, although unable to fully divest themselves of their Christian leanings and prepossessions. The bedrock of the agamic philosophy and mysticism has to be delved into through Sanskrit, and delvers for that purpose have so far been few and far between. Even in the otherwise pregnant treatise recently put forth in German by Dr. M. Winternitz on the history of Indian literature, Geschichte der indischen Literatur Österband, the only mention that is made of the Agamas is in regard to the Shakta Tantras, which he simply calls Tantras. In other words, he details a few Tantras which are Shaktic, and though Shaivagamas are not related to the Shakta Tantras by any organic community of thought or descent, such a detailing is, at any rate, indicative of the recent extensions made by European scholars of light and leading to the province of Indological research, which hitherto has observed a sort of watertight orthodoxy of scope. It is to be hoped that when a second edition is called for of that German work, Dr. M. Winternitz will not be slow to avail himself of the materials afforded by the Agamas, and thereby add to the post-Vedic chapters of his book. At the same time, it is clear that Dr. Paul Deussen, another German Sanskritist and metaphysician of superb accomplishments and talents, gives indications of a knowledge of the Shaiva Darshana. In his masterly digest of the monistic idealism of Shankara, published in German, Das System der Vedanta Zweit Anfang, he refers to the Bhashya of Srikantha on the Brahma Sutras. The related portions were translated by me from German into English for the Brahmavadin in 1907 to 1908. And in his more recent work on the post-Vedic philosophy, issued in the same European language, Allgemeingültig der Philosophik Österband, Drittabelung der Nachvedisch Philosophie der Inder. He devotes a chapter to the Shaiva Darshana. There is, however, nothing to show that Professor Deussen has dived into the agamic literature at first hand, as he has, for instance, done into the Upanishadic in the course of his descent into the wells of the ancient Aryan monism. Further, the Agamas have their own interpretations to offer as regards the cardinal precepts and teachings of the archaic Upanishads, and hence a thorough grounding in the Agamas and in such of the Puranas as have visibly felt the influence of, or been nurtured on the same soil as the Agamas, will altogether place the student on a new standpoint, and the Upanishadic teachings in a new perspective, that is to say, in a setting that will be different to what has till now been considered by the orthodox school of European Orientalists as the purely Vedantic view of the entire arcanum or scheme of Indian metaphysics. Consequently, an independent study of the Agamas, untrammeled by any prior predilections, will prove to be of inestimable value to those Orientalists who would be glad to investigate de novo whether the Upanishadic teachings will not bear any other philosophic interpretation than the one accorded to it heretofore by the so-called accepted schools of Hindu philosophy. Again, in the last important work that Max Muller published previous to his death, The Six Systems of Indian Philosophy, though there are indications that he knew of the existence of the Agamanta in both Sanskrit and Tamil, there is nothing to show that he went into or was conversant with the details of the Shaiva Darshana as developed by the Divyagamas. Dr. George Buehler had, it is said, an idea of making quite a study of the treatises in Sanskrit that were based on the Agamas as far as they concerned the Spanda and the Pratyabhijna phases of the Shaiva Darshana, but his loss came off all too soon in 1898, and so Dr. L.D. Barnett is perhaps the only extant European Orientalist that has for some years past been taking on abiding interest in the study of the literature relative to the Shaiva Darshana in Sanskrit, and it must be said to his lasting credit that he is not only a thoroughgoing Sanskrit scholar, but is also an accomplished student of the Dravidian vernaculars, and his writings bear an unmistakable stamp of very good acquaintance with the works bearing on most of the phases of the Agamanta, to wit, the Pratyabhijna, the Virashaiva, and the Suddhashaiva, the parent of the system developed by Mekandar in Tamil. He has translated into English the Paramarthashara of Abhinavagupta, a Pratyabhijna work, and edited other Shaiva works in Sanskrit. Another Pratyabhijna work, by the name of Shiva Sutra Vimarsini, has recently been Englished by Dr. P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar. Dr. Wilhelm Jahn seems to take a lively interest in agamic research. Zeitschrift der Deutschen Morgenländischen Gesellschaft, Band 25, pages 380, in sequence, which imports great future possibilities therefore at his hands, and Dr. F. Otto Schrader will not be long in coming out with an edition of the Mahartamanjari, a Pratyabhijna work to which I have been desired to append an English translation with critical and exegetical notes. The task of continuing the translation of the Mrigendra Agama from the point where Mr. M.K. Narayanaswamy Iyer left it has devolved on me as a matter of friendly office, and though I have not been able to make any large progress with the continuation by interruptions of an unlooked-for description, yet it is hoped that the entire translation may soon be ready. A totally new translation into English of Nilakantha's Brahmasutra Bhasya with a pious Shivarkamandipika, which is its elaborate scholium in Sanskrit, has already been undertaken by me, but it will in any case take some time to finish it. That translation will be fortified with rich critical apparatus, illustrative and explanatory notes, and special introductions in which a digest in English of the essential portions of most of the agamas now available will for the first time be unreservedly incorporated. The above is all that may be said to have been achieved or to be near within an ace of achievement in the matter of the elucidation of the Shaiva Darshana. On the purely expositional side, the doctrines of the agamas have found a reverent and apt interpreter in the scholar-sage Mr. P. Ramanathan, whose writings it is not possible to surpass either in this peninsula or beyond, for either clarity of thought or directness of appeal, but unfortunately for scholars he has not chosen to write on the subject more often or copiously than his writings would lead the reader to expect. On the other hand, the literature and the mysticism of the Agamas have also had their share of travesty and mockery. In a newfangled work on Indian philosophy, recently brought out by Mr. P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar, the last production is a curious mixture of laborious learning and hoaxing horseplay, which will neither appeal to the scholarly philosopher nor the humor-loving general reader, save for some bibliographical bits of varied character and uncertain authority. The book is a failure as a genuine resume of the factors that enter into the constitution of the many mystic and metaphysical cults that have overrun the post-Vedic India, and worst of all, the chapters of the book relative to the Agamas and the Shaiva Darshana are vitiated in places by gross misinterpretations and in others by mistakes of fact begotten of the direct ignorance. As a piece of performance, the book is obviously inspired by a desire to synthetically emulate, in the realm of Hindu philosophic investigation, the divergent achievements of Westerns like Dr. Paul Carew and Professor David Mason, and how little the author has succeeded in his endeavor however, might be transparent to anyone who would only care to read with some attention the chapters bearing on the Shaiva dogmatics and the Shaiva Gamas. The Christian Literature Society is daily engaged in its storming operations against one phase or another of Indian thought, so that an occasional devil's advocate from within certainly fulfills a momentous function in the economy of academic investigation. In that sense, at any rate, such an author as Mr. P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar ought to be welcomed instead of being tabooed as unworthy of a piecemeal examination and sober analysis. The Agamas contended that they constitute the truest exegesis of the Vedas, and their origins are certainly as ancient as those of some of the classical Upanishads. If the fire worship he regarded as the ritual inculcated in the Vedas as the outer symbolism of spiritual truths, the temple worship may, on its side, be also said to assume a similar importance in regard to the Agamas. The Agamas bring in temple worship as only a further concomitant of fire worship, the one being regarded as an ancillary adjunct to the other. The only difference they introduce in the elements of fire worship is the deletion of animals as objects of sacrifice. The higher interpretations put upon the sacrificial act in many of the Upanishads are all to be found in the Agamas, though the latter lead up to those interpretations through the symbolism of fire worship, as worked out along the channel of temple worship. For the rest, it will not be seen that in India at the present day there is hardly a Hindu that does not observe some kind of temple worship or another, which points to the conclusion that the Agamas have had, in one form or another, a universal hold upon the continent of Hindu India, and that their influence tells. It may be easy to point to specific passages of the Vedas, and thereby put up a thesis that they do not contemplate temple worship. Be that as it may, it will be equally easy to demonstrate that the Agamas are the legitimate outcome of the teachings promulgated by the Vedas, and that the more important portions thereof, that is to say the purely mystic and philosophical, were in every way anterior to such as deal with the rites of temple worship and the technique of sacred architecture. Hence, the course of development on agamantic lines points to the inception of the Vidya and the Yogapadas of the Agamas, as the next great stride after the stratification of the earlier Upanishads, and the Vidya and the Yogapadas did, in their turn, gradually necessitate the outer rites of symbolism in view of a congregational worship adapted to the needs of the average man with a heart within him. Those liturgic rites were enshrined in the remaining padas of the Agamas, and the places for the performance of such rites became the temples. There are, for instance, Agamas in which the order of arrangement of the padas follows exactly the chronology herein explained, while there are also others in which the arrangement is reversed, due possibly to a later deliberate desire to follow logic of theoretic sequence in preference to the order of natural evolution. Temples are very ancient institutions, though only less ancient than the Upanishads of undoubted antiquity, and there is no doubt that though the first impulse to temple worship had come from the Kashmirian region, the institution flourished in South India with considerable pomp and circumstance. The construction of the sacrificial pavilion for the performance of the Shrauta rites is, as made out from the Sulba Sutras, chiefly astronomical in design and import, and not less so is that of the temple, every part of which has an analogue with either an astronomical phenomenon or a zodiacal convention, and this astronomical significance of the temple symbolism runs in some of the Agamas side by side with the spiritual import that we have learned to associate with the same symbolism. There are also phases of the Shaiva Darshana in which the temple worship is not regarded with favor, either because it is not considered directly contributory to one's spiritual upliftment and eventual emancipation, or because it proves at a specific stage an outworn and jejun observance unsuited to the spiritual wants of the votary, the Agamas have branched out from the same stem of the Vedic tree that produced the earlier Upanishads, and were at one time as widespread in India as the Upanishads themselves. Like the Upanishads, the Agamas also became, in course of centuries, the basis of a number of creeds, which, though unanimous in accepting the essentials of the Agamic teaching, were divergent as regards rituals, observances, and minor unessential details. The earliest concretion of the Agamic doctrines as a code of systematic dogmatics had its birth in Kashmir, under the name of Spanda and Pratyabhijna darshanas, which gradually swayed the whole of the Trans-Vindhyan Upper India. It is not a safe procedure to associate, as some do, the early origins of the Lakutisha Pashupata with those of any of the phases of the Shaiva darshana that recognizes the Shaivagamas as its infallible scriptures of authority, since the dividing line between the two forms of faith is formed by the circumstance that the Lakutisha Pashupata, which at present is confined to the upper parts of the Bombay Presidency, does not take its stand on the Shaivagamas. The stream of the Pratyabhijna and the Spanda flowed south and became the parent of the Virashaiva system that in its turn grew influential in and round the Deccan. An earlier current of the Pratyabhijna and the Spanda had in the meantime found its way into South India to form the nucleus of what later on, in the days of the medieval theologians, became the compact system of the Suddhashaiva darshana. The philosophy that is at the back of all these three darshanas, the Agamanta, which is known by various names, the chief of which being the appellation Shaiva Siddhanta, the logical conclusion established by the Shaiva darshana. The three philosophic categories which the Agamanta recognizes are nature, soul, and spirit. The entire economy of the present dispensation is under the active control of the spirit, and is especially designed by him in view to the emancipation of the soul. Nature is multicolored and many-vestured, and is the material cause of not only the outer universe, which hides within the immensity of its bosom countless hosts of sidereal systems, but also of our body, with all its grosser and subtler divisions and components, its instruments of knowledge and action, its proclivities and tendencies, in which the soul lives as in a cottage. The spirit is immanent in both nature and soul, and is in fact their guiding principle. He is thus the soul's soul. It is not in the power of the soul to lead an independent existence. Either it must remain in unwitting communion with nature, overpowered by her blandishments, or in conscious fellowship with the spirit, an intermediate state being thus practically denied to it. If it ceases to gravitate towards nature, it must lean on to the spirit. The samsara chakra is the soul's orbit, which represents the resultant of two forces continually acting upon it. The orbit certainly shrinks up towards the spirit when the soul would not be attracted by nature. The soul has the ability to know both nature and spirit, as it is possessed of sentiency, an attribute which it only shares in common with the spirit. But it cannot be cognized by nature, as she lacks sentiency, and for the same reason the senses and the mind, which are fashioned out of insentient nature, cannot cognize the soul. Nor has it usually an opportunity to cognize as such its own true lineaments, because of its ceaseless and indistinguishable communion with either nature or spirit, a communion which prevents the soul from identifying its genuine lineaments. The soul is possessed, in other words, of the remarkable tendency of ever appearing in the colors of either of the two other categories that chances to be in association therewith for the nonce, since, as we have shown, it is for one thing seldom if ever in a state of complete aloofness from both nature and spirit, and cannot for another associate with either of those categories without its being indistinguishably merged in, or its becoming one with it. Consequently, the soul ordinarily sees in itself either nature or spirit, but not its own form. It is beginninglessly entangled in the fascinations of nature, and the spirit carries on his fivefold operations with the body of pure sentient energy, the outcome of his own free will, solely to disentangle it from those ruinous fascinations. The universe that we see around us has nature for its material cause, the spirit for its efficient cause, and his body of pure sentient energy for its instrumental cause. Nature is specially superintended by the spirit in order that she, albeit insentient, may the more rigorously and consistently exhibit the law of desert and causality in relation to the soul. The law of causation is really the inherent and eternal property of nature. As long as the soul chooses to enjoy the company of nature, so long will her law of causality and desert hold the soul tight within its meshes. But her connection with the soul is, after all, but temporary, though she is by herself eternal. It is also possessed of an ingrained perversity that is inherited from nature, and hence eventually eradicable, whereby it mistakes its sensuous or sensual wallowing in the lap of nature for its appointed goal, and thus converts its spirit-given instruments of emancipation, formed out of nature, into effective energies of its own perdition. The award of spiritual freedom is always made by the spirit to the soul by an act of grace, when the moment for that award, which involves a complete emancipation from its bondage to nature, has arrived. The spirit reveals himself to the soul in any manner he pleases, and blesses it with his eternal fellowship of ineffable power and joy. The above, in short, is the plainest summary of the central truths of the Agamanta, when shorn of all learned technicalities, and it will not be difficult to see how simple the whole teaching runs. We shall now look at some of the agamic teachings a little more closely. The three categories, nature, soul, and spirit, are, as we have already seen, eternal. That is to say, are without either start or finish, but the soul and nature are under the control of the spirit, and have nothing like absolute independence of action, which the spirit alone enjoys to the full. The spirit is an embodiment of love and compassion, or, as it is sometimes expressed, is nothing but life, light, and love. The souls are infinite in number, but a broad marshalling brings them under three classes, with reference to the varying grades of their bondage to nature. Nature is governed by ceaseless cycles of periodic manifestation and dissolution, cycles which turn out, however, to be of many sorts and conditions, when regard is had not only to the extent or the interval between the periods, but also to the specific character, phase, or grade of the manifestations and dissolutions. Manifestation is simply a process of becoming patent, while dissolution that of becoming latent. Nature ever endures, liberating between a condition of grossness and ponderability on the one hand, and subtlety and imperceptibility on the other. She is per se inert, and every cycle of her activity is only rendered possible by the peculiar impact she receives from the spirit and his immanence in her. The essential active attribute of the insentient nature is her rigid adherence to the law of causation and desert, both physically and morally. And if the statement be made that she is the spirit-appointed material instrument of the soul's salvation, all we are to understand therefrom is, the spirit requires the soul to seek its emancipation only by wedding nature and thereby passing the ordeal of causality. But the elaborate process which nature daily employs to bring in more and more souls as her suitors, in order that they may be schooled under the law of causation, are indeed very inscrutable, although exceedingly seductive. She first seduces the soul into her company by her irresistible fascinations, and finally tires it by her inexorable law of causality, which at the same time reveals her inward gruesomeness to the deceived soul. The soul then rates her at her proper worth, when she also, in her turn, becomes a penitent and obedient instrument at its hands, by letting go her hold of causality on the soul. And thus nature proves successively a seducer, a taskmaster, and a servant in relation to the soul, in accordance with the degree of spiritual progress attained by it. The soul is originally stupefied with the darkness of involved or inchoate nature, and in that condition remains tossed about in her unfathomable womb till the spirit quickens it, so that it may take its chance towards its permanent spiritual freedom by consciously contacting nature. At each dissolution, the unemancipated soul reverts to the womb of nature and awaits its return to the highway of samsara with her next manifestation. The salvation of the soul, when once attained, is permanent and irrevocable, but the unconscious stupor in which it is primarily plunged has no beginning. How the soul comes by that oblivion, or what amounts to the same thing, how it gets to be beginninglessly entangled in nature, cannot be satisfactorily explained, and any endeavor to do so, however deftly managed, will be simply landing oneself in a vicious circle of ad infinitum regressus. In other words, the soul's state of bondage has no beginning, but has an end, while the soul's spiritual freedom has a definite beginning, but no end. It is at this point the doctrine of the Agamanta becomes hard of comprehension to those who cannot accept it solely on the testimony of the saints that know the mysteries of the Spirit. Be it remarked, however, en passant, that similar difficulties face us when we endeavor to examine other systems of philosophy put forth in India. There is hardly a philosophy or a reasoned system without a cornering difficulty that is hydra-headed and protean-shaped, which, if it be deftly eschewed from one part of our discussion, certainly threatens us with paralysis, if not positive extinction of thought in another. The agamic mysticism makes quite a specialty of the subjective processes connected with the soul's emancipation, on the principle that the cottage in which the soul lives is a minified copy or replica of the outer nature, and the active spirit behind nature is again the soul's soul. A graduated course of spiritual discipline is prescribed, quite replete with apt methods to suit the soul, in every one of its stages, whereby it is first trained to enter upon a minute examination of the constitution and functions of nature through a detailed and searching inspection of its own cottage, and then taught to slowly and steadily disentangle itself from the enmeshments of nature, and is finally left in a condition fit for the grace of emancipation from the spirit. The disentanglement from the meshes of nature is briefly marshaled as tenfold, dasha karyani. The condition of the soul in its different grades of bondage to nature is earmarked as 18-fold, ashtadasha avashtha. The course of nature's manifestation is regarded as 6-fold. Shadadvana, the mood of nature, is proclaimed as 5-fold, panchakala, and so on. And in this fashion, many a precious hint is dropped in the agamas, not only with reference to the procession of nature in her manifestation, and her precession in her involution, but also in connection with her unsuspected methods of seducing the unwary soul, and with the only ways of keeping her at her proper vocation, to wit, as an obedient handmaiden of the spiritward-bound soul. All these, however, but make for a preparation to await the appearance of the Spirit, who at the right moment, that is only known to him, suddenly opens the door to his kingdom, Shankarapura, upon the ever-expectant soul, and admits it to his never-ending fellowship, Ananyasainya. So much for an imperfect summary of a system of ancient thought, philosophy, and mysticism, to an exposition of which the various papers, now brought together for the first time in book form, from the periodicals in which they originally appeared, have addressed themselves. The only mood in which the themes tackled by our author in this book must be approached is one of reverence and devotion, that was so eloquently pleaded for recently in the stirring address delivered by the Honorable Mr. V. Krishnaswami Iyer before the convocation of the Madras University, an address which, though primarily addressed to boys, has yet graver lessons for old boys, as these are, in truth, no better than babes in the wide school of nature. Madras, the 13th of December, 1911. V. V. Ramanan. Flower and fragrance, a floral wreath. What is there in nature so full of beauty and so symbolic of the heart's purity, innocence, and love and joy as the tiniest flower of the field? What reflects the great divine beauty and the divine loveliness and the divine harmony more than the lowliest blossom of the dale? The freshness, the symmetry, and the delicate tracery of those flowers, how they appeal to man's inmost nature, and how inspiring they are. Need we wonder, therefore, that they have attracted, not more than what they are entitled to, we should say, the attention and love of the Oriental, and they enter largely into his enjoyments, his religion, and philosophy. They hold a considerable place in Oriental symbology, and the Indian has loved to illustrate his great truths from flowers. No ceremonies can be performed without flowers, and he loves to deck with them the presence of his heavenly Father, and he calls out to his brethren, O ye who wish to attain peace of mind, if ye, our Father of Aru, worship with flowers of bhakti, then will ye attain mukti, Devaram. The flower in its threefold character of flower, color, and fragrance appeals to him as the visible presence of that which is Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Like the flower, its color and its fragrance, the Lord as Sat, Chit, and Ananda assumes form, says the author of Tiruvilayadil Puran, a work, by the way, noted for its charming diction and great powers of clear description. Our Saint Appar addresses this divine form as, O thou cow, the five products of the cow, O thou intelligence, thou Agni, thou sacrificial food, thou tongue, words proceeding from the tongue, thou Lord, present in the heart of the four Vedas, thou flower, fragrance present in the flower, thou joy of the flower present in the hearts of the freed, thou Deva, Deva of Devas, thou effulgent sun, lo, such is thy divine presence. To the philosophic and highly devout Manikavachaka, the delicate connection of the flower and its fragrance has appealed in another light, and he sings of his greatness in filling all inseparably and surpassingly like the fragrance of the flower. In another place he compares this very connection to the connection of body and soul, and in comparing both to the connection of the param, distinguishes them at the same time. Like the soul present in the body and the fragrance in the flower, the supreme param pervades them and surpasses all. The fools, not perceiving this truth, simply delight in enjoying the fruits of their own karma. The words of these my father has taught me not to listen, by making me his slave, and has drawn me to the society of his bhaktas. This practice has been permitted to me to see. Though God's connection with us is compared to the connection of the soul and the body, yet in this case the omnipresence of the soul is still confined to the body, and the connection yields the soul only a fancied pleasure, and not a real and lasting one, differing thereby from the Supreme, who pervades all and surpasses all, and who is all love and all bliss, ready to impart this love and bliss to those who understand him as such. And when this undying love is possessed, then, that very moment, the fragrance of Shivam, love, Ananda, will blow out of the flower of Jiva, Tirumular. That great yogin Tirumular is very prolific in the use of the simile of the flower, and amidst a variety of such we select one in which he piles his flowers of rhetoric thick, one over the other, to express the omnipresence of the Most Supreme. My Lord and my King is present, united in all, like feeling in air, sugar in the cane, butter in milk, and the sweet juice in the fruit, and the fragrance in the blossom. Our Saint Tayamanavar, whose felicity in epithets and phrase-making we will some day illustrate, uses most happy language in this connection in invoking that rock of love, O thou support of the devoted who attain to the limitless yoga samadhi by the one word of their divine guru, when they view this vast world as the supreme bliss. O thou loving friend of even my lowly self, O thou rock of joy, uniting with and showing in all bodies and the world and the souls, like the fragrance playing on the half-blown flower, shaped like the half-parted, elegant, and sweet-toned tinkling bells on children's feet. The comparison of the half-opened flower in the jasmine, for instance, in which the fragrance is the sweetest and sharpest, to the sweet bells with half-parted mouths tied round children's feet, is most happy and delicious. Nakarar is a very ancient author said to belong to the last Sangam or college of Pandits in Madura, and he has, Lo, my Lord of Kailasha, which soars high above all, without any other higher than itself, is present in all, like the meaning in the word, and the soul in the body, and the fragrance in the flower. We will weave into this growing wreath one more flower culled from the garden, Shiva Bogasharam, of the founder of Dharmapura Mat, inasmuch as it illustrates the meaning of Advaita clearly. The Advaita relation of God and the perfected soul in Mukti is like the Advaita relation existing always between fire and wood, heat and water, sweetness and honey, fragrance and flower, Akash and wind. Mightily diffident as we are of achieving anything without the grace, Arul, of the Most High, and without the spirits of the sanctified filling our inmost soul, we have helped ourselves to these holy flowers of his bhaktas, to make a wreath and lay at the fragrant lotus feet of him who has never been known to forsake his devotees, and pray to him in all love and in all humility, to crown our humble efforts with success. The light of truth, or Unmai Vilakam, of Tiruvadigai Manavashagam Kadandar. This short treatise, consisting of 54 stanzas, is one of the 14 Siddhanta Shastras, and its author is said to be Tiruvadigai Manavashagam Kadandar, one of the 49 disciples of Saint Makandar. That he was a native of Tiruvadigai and a pupil of Saint Makandar is certain, but there are no other particulars available about his life history. That he must have been an advanced sage is evident from the name he bears, which means he who has passed beyond thought and speech. The author tries to expound in these few pages the truth of the sacred agamas, without going into argumentation, just so much as is sufficient for the aspirant after spiritual truth to bring the teaching into actual daily practice. They are in the form of questions addressed to the teacher, Saint Makandar, and answers elicited from him. The later part of the treatise explains the truth of the Panchakshara and Sri Nataraja symbols. We hope the book will be of use to many. We place him in our heart, the five-armed god in strong rut, of russet color, tusked mouth, and pot belly, so that we may be freed of our ignorance and be enabled, without fault, to spread the light of truth, to be gathered from the sacred agamas. O thou my teacher, that perceiving the truth, showedst the truth of supreme knowledge and bliss, after removing the falsehood, by proving it to be false. O thou truth that will not give out falsehood, O thou that residest in Tiruvenanallur, hear, O thou, my humble petition, and deign to answer my queries. O my teacher, explain to me the following. What are the 36 tattvas? What is a nava? What is that karma which arose even then? What am I who seem to differ from these? Who art thou? What is the Lord's sacred dance? And what is the truth of the Panchakshara? O my son who is immersed in blissful yoga, hear what I am now imparting to you in accordance with the teachings of the Supreme Agamas, graciously uttered of yore by the Supreme Shiva. The earth's form is a four-sided figure, the water is of the form of a crescent, the fire is of the form of a triangle always, the air is a six-sided figure, the akash is a circle, and the soul gets a body formed of these. The color of these is golden, white, red, black, smoky color, respectively, and their letters are Tamil characters. Their symbols are diamond sword, the lotus flower, swastika, the 6 spots, and Amrita Bindu, respectively. So the old Agamas declare, O my son. The gods of the elements, earth, etc., are Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, Maheshwara, and Sadashiva, and their functions are respectively creation, sustentation, regeneration, giving rest, Tirabhava, and showing grace, Anugraha. Brahma creates, the lotus-eyed Vishnu protects, Rudra destroys, and Isha gives them rest, and Sadashiva shows grace always. The earth is hard, water cool, and fire hot. Air flows hither and thither, and Akash gives room to all. We have now set forth the number and quality of the elements. If we are to tell you about the 5 deceitful perceptions, they are the desire-producing sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. Hear the enumeration of the Jivanendriyas. Know them to be the ear, the skin, the eye, the tongue, and the nose, which perceive the low sensations in this low world. The ear perceives sound through akash, the body perceives touch through the air, the eye perceives light through fire, the tongue perceives taste through water, and the nose perceives smell through the earth. So the Agamas declare, they who conquer these senses secure the blissful nirvana. The karmendriyas giving rise to speech, etc., are mouth, feet, hands, anus, and the genital organs. The mouth speaks through the aid of akash, the feet move through the aid of air, the hands work through the aid of fire, the anus excretes through the aid of water, the genital organs have pleasure through the aid of earth. Hear now the enumeration of the Antakaranas. They are Manas, Buddhi, Ahankara, and Chitta. They respectively perceive, reason, linger, and reflect. The foregoing 24 tattvas are stated by the ancient Agamas to be the Atma tattvas. Hear now the Vidya tattvas expounded to me. Time, Niyati, Kala, Vidya, Raga, Purusha, Maya. This is their order. Hear now their nature with attention. Time measures the past, gives enjoyment in the present, and contains new store for the future. Niyati Tattva fixes the order and sequence of karma. Kala Tattva induces action. Vidya Tattva induces intelligence. The Purush Tattva induces perception of the five senses, and Maya induces doubt and ignorance. We have now stated the Vidya Tattvas. Here now the Suddha Tattvas. They are Suddhavidya, Ishvara, Sadashiva, Shakti, and Shiva Tattvas. Suddhavidya induces more intelligence than action. Ishvara Tattva induces more action than intelligence. Sadashiva Tattva induces them both in equal proportion. Shakti Tattva induces action, and Shiva Tattva induces jnana alone. We have now fully stated the 36 tattvas. Hear now about the two kinds of mala, anava and karma. Stated anava induces ignorance. Karma mala induces you to identify yourself thoroughly with the chain of pleasures and pains. O thou rare teacher, thou hast explained to me the nature of the 36 tattvas, and anava and karma. Deign now to show me the nature of myself, who seems to differ and not differ from these. Hear well what I state. Achit cannot subsist before pure Chit. Chit cannot perceive Achit. The Atma, soul, is what distinguishes and perceives both Chit and Achit, so the Vedas declare without doubt. Hear now how the 36 tattvas cannot be conscious of themselves. The 6 kinds of taste cannot perceive themselves. So also the tattvas do not know themselves. As a person has to taste these 6 kinds of taste and then perceive them, so you are the intelligent person who, uniting with these tattvas, perceives each and all of them. Out of thine undiminished grace hast thou shown me my nature. Explain to me thy own imperishable form. As the sun enables the eye to see, so will we enlighten you in your intelligence. No more, the senses cannot understand without the soul, and cannot understand the soul. So also do we enlighten you without your being able to perceive us. As the vowel letter A is to the rest of the letters, so do we stand as the life of all life. When we are not present in any soul, then will there be no light. So the good Agamas declare. O Mikandarnatha, graciously expound so that I may understand the nature of the sacred dance with the sound of the 5 letters seen by the sages. O my son, hear, the supreme intelligence dances in the soul formed of the letter Ya, with a form composed of the 5 letters Shi, Va, Ya, Na, Ma, for the purpose of removing our sins. Hear now how the dance is performed. In his feet is Na, in his navel is Ma, in his shoulders is Shi, in his face is Va, in his head is Ya. The head holding out protection is Ya, the hand holding the fire is Na, the foot holding down Muyalaka is Ma. The arch over Srinataraja is Omkara, and the Akshara, which is never separate from the Omkara, is the filling splendor. This is the dance of the Lord of Chidambara. They understand this who have lost their self, Ahankara. Understanding, they leave their births behind. Creation starts from the drum. Protection proceeds from the hand of hope. The fire produces destruction. From the foot holding down proceeds Tirobhava. The foot held aloft gives mukti. By these means our Father scatters the darkness of Maya, burns the strong karma, stamps down mala, anava, and showers grace and lovingly plunges the soul in the ocean of bliss. This is the nature of his dance. The silent jnanis, destroying the 3 kinds of mala, establish themselves where their selves are destroyed. There they witness the sacred dance filled with bliss. This is the very dance of the Shamanatha, whose very form is grace. The one who is past thought and speech assumes graciously the form composed of the Panchakshara in the dancing hall of Parashakti, so as to be seen by his consort Uma, Haimayati. They never see births who see this mystic dance. O my gracious Guru, thou hast explained to me beautifully the nature of the Nadanta dance. Let me now know the nature of the Panchakshara. Can they be one with the letters which are perishable? The symbols of these letters may be perishable, but not their connotation in any language. The meanings of the 5 letters respectively are God, His grace, Shakti, soul, Tirobhava, and Mala. God, grace, soul, Tirobhava, and Mala are the purport of the 5 letters, Shivaya Nama. If pronounced beginning with na, you will not obtain grace. You will obtain it when you pronounce it beginning with she. If this beautiful Panchakshara is meditated upon, the soul, getting rid of its Anavamala, will land in the region where there is neither light nor darkness, and there God's grace, Shakti, will unite it to Shivam. If the Panchakshara is pronounced with the letters denoting the two malas, then will he not get rid of his three malas and obtain bliss. If pronounced otherwise according to law, your jnana will be boundless, and you can live in bliss. In the Panchakshara are found the Agamas and the Vedas, given out by the gracious God. In it are found the Puranas, in it the blissful dance, and in it is found the silent mukti, which passes beyond all. The Agamas declare that the nature of the union secured by the muktas is like that of the fruit, and its taste, fire and its heat, the musical composition and its tune. The Vedas with truth declare that as the various tattvas are found united inseparably in the bound condition, so the souls in the freed condition will dwell as one with God. As the moon's light is indistinguishable in the light of the sun, so would the soul unite itself to the foot of the Supreme Lord and plunge itself in bliss. If it be said that the soul had to go and unite itself to God, then the omnipresence of Shiva will be destroyed. If soul is said to have united himself to the soul, then they must be different. But what then is the truth? The position is like that of the sun which surrounds the man who had lost his blindness. Thou tellest me that the Supreme One, who is past thought and speech, is gracious and suffers no taint, and that like this Pati, the Pashu and Pasha are also eternal. Prove this in Mukti also. O my son, hear how they are in Mukti. He who enjoys the supreme bliss is the soul. He who imparts the supreme bliss is the first cause. That which increases this happiness is Mala. Understand this in all love. O my father, let me know the unfailing means of securing this mukti. Hear me state this. They who regard and worship the Guru, Linga, and God's devotees as the incomparable God will not suffer births and deaths. Melting in love as the cow that had calved recently, the Jivanmuktas will take strong hold of the Guru, Linga, and Bhaktas, and will be possessed of great love to them, which will destroy their sins. O Mekandarnatha, the fruit of true penance, who dwellest in both Tiruvannamalur and Svetavana, O ocean of grace, I have been saved by thee, saved from being tossed about in the ocean of sorrow. The house of God. Ye are the temples of God. O thou the beginning, the middle, the limitless limit, the light and the wisdom, and all things manifest, the indivisible one, the female and the male. Glory, glory to thy dance, in Pillai, the intellectual region of universalism. O thou the light from which speech and thought turn back, the very form of grace, the wonderful presence, the crown resting on the rare Vedashiras, in the beautiful Chitsabha of Chitparavyoma, thou dost dance delightedly. Glory, glory to thy tinkling foot. O thou imperishable triple form and formless, O thou supreme intelligence working steadfast in the six forms of religion, who could know thee after raising the curtain of Maya? Thou dost dance in the hearts of those who think of thee. Thou art the priceless jewel. Thou my eye, thou the supreme panacea, thou the ocean of Chinmudra wisdom, who didst teach the four ancient sons, Mananjnana from under the sacred banyan tree, thou the Deva of Devas. The first two verses we quote from St. Secular's Periya Puranam, and the last from St. Tayamanavar, in praise of the famous temple at Chidambaram, and the sacred mysteries contained therein. We have elsewhere observed that even if we have lost our books on Veda and Vedanta, we could evolve the whole thing again from the symbols we possess, provided we had the tiny key to unlock these sacred mysteries. The hoariest and most ancient wisdom is thus enshrined in these unmistakable symbols, and when we understand them aright, we are enabled to test and know which is the true philosophy and which is the true religion, surrounded as we are today by a multitude of religions and philosophies, conflicting in themselves and yet claiming to be the most ancient and the truest. It is the most unfortunate thing in India and in Indian religion that the same books and the same texts furnish the authority and the sanction for every existing phase of belief and thought, and when this fact is coupled with such a blind ignoring of what is past and what is modern, and and when the materials for applying such an historical test are not very considerable, the task of deciding which is the true interpretation and which is false is rendered very difficult, though not impossible, and the value of a test, as indicated above, cannot be lost sight of. In interpreting documents, the rule ought no doubt to be that where the words are plain and unambiguous, the plain meaning of the words ought to be made to prevail, and no casuistry should be allowed to mar the effects of its plain meaning. It is only when the words are ambiguous any interpretation as to its real meaning by other evidence is permissible at all. Then again, when we begin to inquire into the truth of any particular custom and tradition, we find how difficult it is to arrive at a uniform conclusion when we have to rely on mere oral evidence, and any documentary evidence, we use it in the strictly legal sense, if available, is of the utmost importance, and the older the document, the greater the value thereof. Then again, consider the difference between the verbal accounts of a dozen people who witnessed a particular scene all at the same time, and the actual scene photographed by an ordinary Kodak. We might be sure to discover discrepancies and contradictions in the oral testimony, though it might be perfectly honest. Of course, there might be exceptionally trustworthy witnesses, as there might be untrustworthy cameras. The test we have proposed above may, as such, be seen to possess all the elements of an old and ancient document and a trusty camera, and the more so when we know as a matter of fact that the written language of the primitive mankind consisted of pictures only. The most ancient Sumerian, the Chaldean, the Egyptian, and the Chinese were all pictorial languages, and it is well known that these were the people who have tried to leave their highest thoughts on religion and philosophy behind them in pictures and statues and monuments. In proceeding, therefore, to unravel the mysteries connected with our symbolism, we must confess that the task is not one which we can conscientiously think of adequately discharging. In attempting the impossible, therefore, we have no other excuse than the one which sage Secular had before him. Though impossible to reach its limits, insatiate love drives me to the task. Before we do so, however, we have to get clear of two sets of men who pester us often with their cant. One of such will raise the cry of sectarianism, and the other with the catchword revivalism. There are some very estimable people belonging to both these classes, we admit, as well as their sincerity, but with most it is all mere cant, pure and unmitigated cant. They believe neither in the one nor in the other. They have neither inclination nor wish to study and think, and pause and inquire into the truth of things. They are themselves sectarians, so blind that they will not acknowledge themselves to be such. They start with the inborn conviction that this is trash, and they have no patience with those who will honestly differ from them, and they clutch at a word, a phrase, to kick up a dust, with the evident object of besmearing the other side. No doubt there is a sort of skepticism which we prize much, a skepticism which will lead one to doubt and inquire into the truth of things, and not to scorn and scoff at everything. And in our inmost heart we do not wish to wound the feelings of a single person, of whatever shade of opinion he may belong to, and is not the present inquiry solely devoted to reach the region of universalism, where, in the words of our sage Tayamanavar, every religionist comes and bows in adoration of the One Supreme, saying they see no symbols of any creed but all Akash, and he states in the previous lines that he reached this region after looking in vain in every creed and in every path for that pure spirit which seeks to reconcile with the path of noblest knowledge all the bitter conflicting creeds and religions. And the place is worth a trial visit even today, for does not Tayamanavar record his experience that his stony heart melted into love and bliss the moment he saw the holy presence? This has not been his experience only, of believers alone. Ages back, scoffers and atheists have felt the power of this presence, and it is recorded of the great atheist guru Jaimini that when he approached, all his unbelief left him, and he composed his song of Vedapadashtava. And though there are thousands of temples all over the land, the heart of every true believer has always turned with love and longing to his center spot, and it is believed that Chidambaram occupies a central geographical position between the northern and southern extremes of India, including Ceylon, and corresponding to this position in the macrocosm, Arunmukha Navalar observes that in the human microcosm also, the place points to the region of Shushumna between Ida and Pingala Nadis. There is another center of heat and vitality and light in the human body, and that is the heart. And the heart is the most vital and delicate organ in the whole system. Every other organ requires its help for its nourishment and upkeep. It is saved and protected from many an ill by its position, which every other organ is exposed to, but that is because that whereas life can be prolonged even after injury to every other organ, life ebbs away the instant the heart is injured. And then is not the heart the seat of love, love pure and undefiled? Pity, kindness, mercy, grace are all different shades of this one love, bhakti, faith. Is there anything else that can compete with this supreme principle? Knowledge, you may exclaim, with its seat in the brain. We dare say not. The slightest injury to the heart completely paralyzes the brain, and the pulsation in the brain itself rises and falls with the heat of the heart itself. It is the one organ in the body which is ever active and knows no rest, when everything else, including the brain, undergoes rest. And in human nature also, what is there which love cannot quicken? It can give life to the despairing and the lifeless, strength to the weak, courage to the coward, and instances have not been wanting to show what extraordinary feats of intellect love has been the cause of. The whole world is bound by the heart, much more than by the intellect alone, and Mrs. Humphrey Ward has portrayed the glowing words, the difference between the man of the intellect and the man of the heart, in her Robert Elsmere. There the man of the intellect pines in secret and in his pride for that very touch which makes the whole world kin, and it is in this heart all mankind have liked to build a temple for the Most High, and the only requisite is that this heart be pure, and the moment this heart is pure, there the light from the invisible Akash will shine, dispelling the darkness that blinds the eye and enabling it to see. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, said the Lord Jesus, and the sage who composed the Taittiriya Upanishad sang long before him, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma Yoveda Nihitam Guhayam Paramavyamam Sosnute Sarvan Kamansaha Brahmana Vipashiteti. He who knows Brahman, which is Sat, which is Chit, and which is endless bliss, as hidden in the cave of the heart, in the highest Akash, he enjoys all blessings as one with the omniscient Brahman. And the most mystical and oldest of the Upanishads, the Chandogya, also repeats the same instruction. Would you like to know what that one thing is which you have to search for and to know, and when you have to search for it, how to know it? Here, there is the Brahmapura body, and in it the Dahara palace of the lotus, Pundarika of the heart, and in it that Antarakasha. Now, what exists in this Akasha, that is to be sought after, that is to be understood? As large as this Akasha is, so large is that Akasha within the heart. Both heaven and earth are contained in it, both fire and air, both sun and moon, both lightning and stars, and whatever there is of him in this world, and whatever is not, all that is contained within it. In an earlier chapter, the Supreme Being is called the Intelligent, whose body is prana, whose form is light, jyotis, whose thoughts are true, who is like the Akasha, omnipresent and invisible, from whom all works, all desires, all sweet odors and tastes proceed, the Atma within the heart, smaller than a grain of rice, smaller than a grain of barley, smaller than a mustard seed, smaller than a canary seed, or the kernel of a canary seed, also the Atma within the heart, greater than the earth, greater than the sky, greater than the heaven, greater than all these worlds. In a later passage, the Upanishad says that that he who is called Akasha is the revealer of all forms and names. That within which these forms and names are contained is the Brahman, the immortal, the Atma. The following verse occurs in the Katha 1-2-20, the Svetashvatana 3:20, and the Taittiriya Mahapanishad, and the same is reproduced in the Shiva Mahapurana. Smaller than small, yet greater than great, in the heart, guha, of this creature, Atma, or Isha, doth repose, that, free from desire, he sees with his grief gone, the Lord and his might by his favor. In the Kaivalyopanishad, the same is reproduced in the following words, beyond the heavens, yet shining in the heart, guha, of his creatures, him the sages, free from desire, reach. Sri Krishna also imparts this most secret of secrets to his pupil, that Ishvara dwelleth in the hearts of all beings, O Arjuna, by his Maya, causing all beings to revolve, as though mounted on a potter's wheel, and importunes him to flee to him to secure supreme peace by his grace. The manner of occupying this seat or dwelling place is elsewhere referred to in the 13th and 9th discourses, 32nd and 6th verses respectively, and these 3 or 4 verses bring out the whole of the Upanishad thoughts, as the omnipresent Akasha is not soiled by reason of its subtlety, so, seated everywhere in the body, the self is not soiled. The support of beings, and not rooted in beings, by Atma is their efficient cause, as rooted in the Akasha, the mighty air moves everywhere, so all things rest rooted in me. This supporter, permitter, spectator, and enjoyer is styled Maheshvara, Paramatman, and Paramapurusha in verse 22, chapter 13. Another verse in the Chandogya says that Gayatri is the body and the heart, because in it all the spirits are established. No wonder, therefore, that in almost every page of the Tamil Veda and the writings of the later Tamil saints, God's truest dwelling place, his house, his palace, his seat, is universally referred to as the human heart. And so it is that the famous shrine we are speaking of is, by preeminence, called the Beautiful House, inasmuch as it is also called the Pundarika Vidu, the House of Lotus, or Dahara Vidu also. And today we will stop after identifying this golden palace in Chidambaram with the human heart, spoken of in the most ancient writings, and we will speak of the great King and Lord who is the dweller in this palace and his characteristics in a future issue. Lotus of the heart. If the real nature of the lotus of the heart is examined, its stalk will be the 24 tattvas, beginning with earth, its petals vidya tattvas and Suddha vidya, its pollen the 64 kalas of Ishvara and Sadashiva, its ovary Shakti, the essence of kalas, its seeds the 51 forms of Nadam, and the Aral Shakti of the Lord Shiva rest on it as fragrance. Shivajnana Bodham 9.3c.